Saints, as we move towards this weekend, the seventh Sunday in the Pentecost season, one of the readings in the lectionary is Genesis 18:20-32, when the Lord reveals to Abraham that he is going to swiftly pass judgment on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story itself has so many different dynamics, and yet I want to focus in on one in particular because it's about Abraham's intercession, and I think it's important to look at that in light of the things that led to this moment. If you remember, in the journey of Abraham, God has spoken to him while he's in Ur of the Chaldees to leave his country, to leave his relatives, and to leave his father's house. And in actual fact, he doesn't quite obey that, and it is his father who takes the lead and moves them toward where Abraham is intended to go, and Terah dies on the way because God is endeavoring to bring Abraham to a place where it's simply he and Sarah. And so when Abraham does finally let go of his father, there is a sense in which he is prepared to move on, and yet again he takes with him his nephew Lot. There's something in him that wants to cling to what gives him a sense of safety and security within relationships he's already formed, and yet the choices he will make in those crucial defining moments will have negative and even deleterious consequences later on, because he will end up having to go to war to rescue Lot. There will be a dispute between Lot's flocks and Lot's shepherds and Abraham's flocks and shepherds. There will be all sorts of stress, and then when they finally get within the confines of the land, Lot wants to choose the better part, and so Abraham will allow him to make his choice, and there will be a dynamic difference between what unfolds in the life and the formation of the spiritual life of Lot and what forms and develops in the life of Abraham. Now, both are going to be processed, and both are going to go through processing that is intended to purify. But one is going to be perfected in faith, and one is going to be ultimately perfected in disobedience, even though he's righteous, and the fruits of his life will be painful. Lot's fruit will be painful. The outcomes he gets from the decisions he's made will be quite painful. Nevertheless, Abraham has a deep love and values his nephew and his family. He's got deep concern. He's wanting the best for his nephew and his family. And all of us that want the best for our family know, even in the pursuit of praying for the best, we have to deal with the fact that everyone makes their own decisions, that God doesn't override the will of those who walk with him or those who pretend to walk with him. God allows us to make our own decisions, and our freedom only happens progressively as we allow Christ to influence us in the choices we make. Freedom isn't I've got the right to do this and I've got the right to do that. Freedom is the perfect influence and the perfecting influence of Christ on the will in every area of our life as he claims those areas of our soul that are being redeemed and brings us from faith to faith and from glory to glory. Christ, progressively by the Spirit on behalf of the Father, is wanting to possess all of the land inside of us. And we don't realize how many areas we are beholden to. We can say, I've got the right to do this, I've got the right to do that. But what if God is saying, this is not what I've called you to? What if God is saying, I am claiming you for myself, and I want the whole of your being to be caught up with and consumed with me? And so the will is, in many respects, as Martin Luther said, in bondage. And apart from the gracious influence of Christ's Spirit to soften us up in areas where we tend to resist. And I've said this before, that we don't realize how much we resist until we get close to the truth. And what happens is that the closer we get to the truth, the more we discover the resistance that's in us to that truth. And that's part of the journey of awakening and enlightenment. It's part of the journey of the spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of Christ. Learning Christ and discerning Christ is an ongoing reality for a disciple of Jesus. And so Abraham is going to go on a journey of faith. Imperfect, yes. Areas that need to be perfected in all of us, yes. But Abraham is at least going to move in that direction and obey God as best as he knows how. He will make mistakes, but he is moving in a direction toward God. Lot, on the other hand, is what we would call carnal. If we look at 1 Corinthians chapters 1, 2, and 3, where Paul speaks of those who are indeed believers, but they live after the lusts of the flesh. They live carnally. They live based on nature. They are driven by natural desires. They've not allowed Christ to influence those areas of their volition, of their will, where they continue to make choices that are less than optimal choices. Now, all of us know people like that, and all of us love many of the people that we know like that because they're friends, they're family, they're people that we interact with, they're people that we care for. These are realities that we live with, especially if we love God. The more intimate we become with God, the more loving we become. The more we allow His gracious Spirit to invade those areas in our own choices, and the more we realize our own resistance, the more we want to see His mercy for others. And so it would be inappropriate to write people off, and yet we can go through major heartache and grief over the resistance others present to God, even when we ourselves have been through those dealings and those chastenings and learned that surrender is wisdom. And yet we watch people press the self-destruct button and the self-sabotage button again and again, and we can grieve. All of us, probably, I would say most of us, have family members that we've grieved over, that make choices that lead to consequences that are utterly painful and utterly self-destructive. And Lot would fit into that area. And so when he chooses again and again for that which his eye can see and doesn't fully obey the mandate of God, his will continues to assert itself to where he says, not your will, but my will be done. And it's seen again and again, and it creates major challenges for Abraham once they're in the land. Because if you remember, Abraham is told to leave his country, his relatives, and his father's house and go to the land God will show him. And instead of doing that, he takes his father with him, and his father actually in Genesis 11 takes the lead. And it's not until Terah dies on the way that Abraham begins to realize, I need to break out from the boundaries of what God said to break out from. And yet, even when he breaks out, he fails to fully honor leave your relatives, because he wants something of the familiar to go with him into the new arena. We are addicted to the predictable and the familiar. We are comfortable with what we know, and we prefer having that with us when we venture into the unknown. And in order to get from what we know to what we don't know, we have to move from the familiar to the unfamiliar, from the seen to the unseen. And that liminal space in between is a place of challenge, a place of crossing thresholds, a place of surrender. And if we don't surrender fully at that critical juncture, the consequences of the choices of not surrendering fully in our will lead to other choices we have to make to live with the choices we made prior. And because Abraham chooses to not fully obey leave your relatives and takes Lot and Lot's family with him, it will become an albatross to him once he gets in the land. He will have to go to war with kings over choices his nephew Lot makes, he will feel a sense of responsibility. We could say within family systems theory that there's a certain amount of codependence that is present within the family dynamic of Abraham's extended family and his relationship to Lot. He's wanting to rescue his nephew. I have been in this full time as a servant of Christ in preaching the gospel and pastoring people for a number of decades now. And all of us can attest to the fact that we want to rescue people. And yet when helping them is hurting us, we fall into the trap of codependency and think we can do more for people than God himself. And that's where we get seduced by our own lack of ability to do what only God can do. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so in this moment, when God now in Genesis 18 comes down as three human beings, God appears as three human beings in Genesis 18. Gregory of Nyssa, the great church father, the Cappadocian father, does a marvelous job expounding on this. But Abraham moves towards the three persons and ministers to them. And in that process, the Lord speaks to Abraham that it's time to judge Sodom. And Abraham, again, out of concern for his nephew and his extended family with his nephew, begins to push back against what the Lord intends to do in Sodom and says, Lord, if there are 50 righteous within the city, will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And as you know, Abraham keeps pressing and goes down to 40. And then he keeps pressing and goes down to 20. And God continues to assure him, if I find 40, I won't destroy the city. If I find 20. Now, ultimately, the city is going to be destroyed. Both Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed, which means God couldn't even find 20 righteous people. But what Abraham is concerned about is his nephew, who has made choices that have led to responses that are less than fully obedient to Christ. He is doing things that are destructive and will ultimately, as a result of this moment and the choices he makes, lose his wife because she will not let go of the city even after they have to depart. And he will end up in an incestuous relationship with his daughters, and the nation of Moab will come out of that, and Lot will end up under a curse. And we won't hear from him anymore for the rest of the redemptive story of Abraham. And yet Abraham is praying earnestly, not so much because he doesn't love God, but because he knows the heart of God. He wants God to prevail, and yet even God, in saying he's willing, cannot go against the will of the person who resists him or won't follow him fully. And all of us know what it's like to live with that pain. And all too often, we tend to say, well, God didn't answer my prayer. Maybe God was working and indeed moving with you in the prayer. And yet the person you were praying for was offering resistance. What do we do then? Well, all we can do is keep praying and not yield to the temptation to try to rescue. Because the more you attempt to rescue and not leave it in God's hands, the more codependent you become, and the more entangled you become in something that is beyond your ability to bring to balance. We have to ultimately let go and let God. I trust this is an encouragement to you. I trust that this applies in areas of your life and that you can make sense of it. Sunday, we're going to continue to move in this season of anticipating God to move. I'm looking forward to an exciting time. It's been a great week between Peter Prothero being here for us on Sunday and then Issachar and all the major voices. We look forward to what's taking place. Bring somebody with you on Sunday. Love you.